The morning sun cast long shadows across the Magic Kingdom parking lot as the Hayes family unpacked their minivan, excitement crackling in the Florida air. 8-year-old Abigail clutched her beloved porcelain doll, Emma, against her chest. A Christmas gift from her grandmother that never left her side. The doll's painted blue eyes and golden ringlets mirrored Abigail's own features, making them appear almost like sisters. Mark Hayes hefted their cooler while his wife Jennifer double-checked their backpack for sunscreen and snacks, their voices mixing with thousands of other families beginning their magical day. It was March 15th, 2014, and the Hayes family had saved for 2 years for this trip from their home in Gainesville. Abigail had circled this date on her calendar for months, drawing little Mickey Mouse heads around it in bright red crayon. She wore her favorite pink sundress with tiny white flowers, the one that made her feel like a princess, and carried Emma everywhere in a small wicker basket her mother had packed specifically for the doll. Before we continue with Abigail's story, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. It really helps us bring you these important stories. And please, comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Your support means everything as we shed light on cases that need to be remembered. The family entered the park just after opening, and Abigail's eyes went wide with wonder at the sight of Cinderella Castle rising majestically before them. Jennifer snapped photo after photo of her daughter's pure joy, images that would later become both treasured memories and painful reminders. They rode the Dumbo ride first, Abigail giggling as their pink elephant soared through the air, Emma securely fastened beside her with a small seatbelt Jennifer had improvised from her purse strap. By noon, the Florida heat had become oppressive, even for March. The family sought refuge in the air conditioning of It's a Small World, where Abigail sang along to every word while pointing out different countries to Emma. "Look, Emma," she whispered to her doll. "That's where Daddy said Grandma came from." Mark and Jennifer exchanged glances over their daughter's head, hearts swelling with the simple pleasure of seeing her so happy. After lunch at the Crystal Palace, they decided to explore Fantasyland more thoroughly. Abigail was particularly excited about meeting the princesses at the Princess Fairy Tale Hall, clutching Emma tightly as they waited in the lengthy line. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, and the crowd seemed to grow thicker by the hour. Jennifer noticed how Abigail kept shifting Emma from arm to arm, the porcelain becoming warm in the heat. It was 3:47 p.m. when disaster struck with the cruel randomness that would haunt the Hayes family forever. They were walking through the crowded hub area near the castle, discussing whether to ride Space Mountain next, when a parade began moving down Main Street. The sudden surge of excited families pushing toward the parade route created a human current that swept Abigail away from her parents' sides in seconds. "Abby!" Jennifer screamed, her voice lost in the chaos of music and cheering children. Mark immediately began pushing through the crowd, his 6-foot frame an advantage as he called his daughter's name. Security was notified within minutes, and cast members began the well-practiced emergency procedures that Disney had refined over decades of operation. The next 4 hours passed in a nightmarish blur of security offices, police interviews, and increasingly desperate searches. Every cast member in the park received Abigail's description. 8 years old, blonde hair in pigtails, pink sundress with white flowers, carrying a porcelain doll with golden hair. The Orange County Sheriff's Office arrived with search dogs, and Disney's own security team began reviewing hundreds of hours of surveillance footage from cameras positioned throughout the park. Jennifer sat in a sterile security office, clutching one of Emma's tiny shoes that had somehow fallen from Abigail's basket during the chaos. She answered the same questions over and over. Was Abigail prone to wandering off? Had there been any custody disputes? Any strangers who had shown interest in their daughter? The questions felt like accusations, each one a knife in her already shattered heart. As night fell over the Magic Kingdom, The search expanded beyond the park boundaries. Police questioned cast members, reviewed guest lists, and began the painstaking process of tracking down every adult who had been in the vicinity when Abigail disappeared. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. In the most magical place on Earth, where every detail was controlled and monitored, a little girl had simply vanished. Detective Carlos Rodriguez of the Orange County Sheriff's Office took lead on the case, bringing 15 years of experience in missing persons investigations. A father of 3 daughters himself, he understood the particular anguish in Mark and Jennifer's eyes. He had worked cases at Disney before, the occasional runaway teenager or confused elderly guest, but never a missing child this young, and never one with so few leads. The surveillance footage revealed Abigail's last known location with heartbreaking clarity. At 3:43 p.m., she was visible holding Emma and walking between her parents near the plaza in front of the castle. At 3:45 p.m., the crowd began surging toward the parade route. At 3:47 p.m., the cameras showed only the chaos of hundreds of people moving in different directions. Despite Disney's sophisticated camera network, there was no clear footage of Abigail after that moment, as if she had simply dissolved into the crowd like sugar in water. The Hayes family remained in Orlando for 2 weeks, refusing to leave without their daughter. They stayed at a modest hotel near the park, Jennifer barely eating, Mark coordinating with law enforcement and organizing volunteer search parties. The local news picked up the story, and soon Abigail's face was on every television screen in Central Florida. Tips poured in, hundreds of them, but none led anywhere concrete. 3 months later, the case had grown cold despite the involvement of the FBI and national media attention. The Hayes family returned to their empty home in Gainesville, where Abigail's room remained exactly as she had left it. Her stuffed animals were still arranged on her bed in the specific order she preferred, and her other dolls sat in their miniature chairs around a toy tea table, waiting for their owner to return and continue their eternal tea party. Jennifer threw herself into advocacy work, starting the Abigail Hayes Foundation to help other families of missing children navigate the complex systems of law enforcement and media attention. Mark struggled to maintain his job as an insurance adjuster, often finding himself unable to concentrate on mundane claims when his daughter was still out there somewhere. Their marriage strained under the weight of grief and the terrible not knowing that followed them through each endless day. The years that followed brought occasional developments. A reported sighting in Jacksonville, a similar-looking girl spotted at a Georgia truck stop, anonymous tips that led investigators down countless dead ends. Each potential lead reignited the flame of hope in the Hayes family's hearts, only to be extinguished when the lead proved false. They learned to live in the strange purgatory of unresolved loss, where grief couldn't properly begin because hope refused to die. Detective Rodriguez never forgot Abigail's case, even as other investigations demanded his attention. He kept her file on his desk, reviewing it during quiet moments, searching for the detail everyone had missed. He interviewed hundreds of people over the years, Disney employees, park guests, security personnel, building a massive case file that filled 3 filing cabinets but still contained no definitive answers. Local law enforcement worked closely with Disney's security team, a group Rodriguez came to respect for their professionalism and genuine commitment to finding Abigail. Disney had implemented additional safety protocols following her disappearance, including enhanced tracking of unaccompanied minors and improved communication between security stations. But these changes felt hollow to the Hayes family, preventive measures that came too late for their daughter. The 5th anniversary of Abigail's disappearance brought renewed media attention and a new age progression photograph that showed what she might look like as a 13-year-old. Jennifer stared at the computer-generated image for hours, trying to find her baby's face in the features of this teenage stranger. The eyes were the same, bright and curious, but everything else belonged to a girl she might never meet. By this time, the Hayes family had relocated to a smaller house across town, unable to bear living in the home where Abigail had picked out her Disney outfit and packed Emma's tiny suitcase. They had donated most of her clothes to charity, but kept her room furniture and Emma's accessories, the miniature furniture, clothes, and especially the tiny wicker basket that had held the doll at Disney. These items lived now in a spare bedroom that Jennifer visited daily, arranging and rearranging them as if proper organization might somehow bring her daughter home. Detective Rodriguez had been promoted by then, but he refused to transfer Abigail's case to another investigator. He had become personally invested in finding answers, not just for his own professional satisfaction, but for the family he had watched suffer for 5 years. He noticed how Mark's hair had gone completely grey and how Jennifer had developed a nervous habit of touching her throat when discussing Abigail. The case had changed him too. He found himself holding his own daughters a little tighter and worrying more when they were out of his sight. The breakthrough came on October 12, 2023, in the most unexpected way possible. A construction crew was demolishing an abandoned warehouse complex in Orlando's industrial district, about 12 miles from Disney World. The buildings had been empty for over a decade, victims of the economic downturn that had left numerous commercial properties scattered throughout Central Florida like forgotten monuments to failed businesses. Jimmy Morrison, a demolition foreman with 23 years of experience, was supervising the clearing of debris from the main warehouse when one of his crew members, Danny Walsh, called out from near a collapsed interior wall. "Hey, Jimmy, you need to see this." Danny's voice carried an unusual tension that made Morrison immediately alert. Behind a pile of fallen drywall and twisted metal shelving, Danny had discovered a small space that appeared to have been deliberately concealed, perhaps an old storage closet or utility room. The area was partially collapsed, but enough remained intact to reveal what looked like a makeshift living space. There was a moldy mattress, empty food containers, and scattered children's clothing in various sizes. And there, sitting propped against the far wall as if carefully placed, was a porcelain doll with golden ringlets and painted blue eyes. Morrison immediately recognized the significance of the discovery and called the Orange County Sheriff's Office before allowing anyone to disturb the scene further. Within an hour, Detective Rodriguez was standing in the ruins of the warehouse, staring at what could be the first real clue in Abigail's disappearance in nearly a decade. The doll was remarkably well preserved, protected from the worst of the weather by the collapsed debris around it. Her dress, a miniature version of Abigail's pink sundress with white flowers, was faded and stained but still recognizable. More importantly, the doll bore a small mark that Jennifer had mentioned during the initial investigation, a tiny chip in the porcelain of the left wrist, where Abigail had accidentally dropped Emma on their kitchen floor months before the Disney trip. Rodriguez carefully photographed every angle of the scene before allowing the crime scene technicians to begin their methodical collection of evidence. The space contained disturbing implications. Someone had been living here, and they had kept children's belongings, including items that spanned different ages and sizes. This wasn't just where Emma had ended up. This was where someone had been bringing children. The forensic examination of the site revealed DNA evidence from multiple sources, some of it degraded by time and exposure, but still potentially viable for comparison. Fingerprints were lifted from surfaces that had been protected from the elements, and every item was catalogued with the meticulous care that such discoveries demanded. The investigation that had seemed permanently stalled suddenly burst back to life with new urgency and purpose. Jennifer's reaction to seeing Emma again was both heartbreaking and hopeful. She identified the doll immediately, pointing out not just the chip in the wrist, but also a tiny mend in the dress, where she had sewn up a small tear, and a barely visible ink stain on one of Emma's shoes, where Abigail had accidentally marked her with a pen while coloring. These small, intimate details confirmed what everyone already knew. This was definitely Abigail's beloved companion. The warehouse had been owned by a shell company that traced back to a man named Thomas Brennan, a 54-year-old former Disney cast member who had been fired in 2013 for inappropriate conduct with guests' children. Brennan had worked in Fantasyland, specifically in areas where families with young children congregated. His termination had occurred just 4 months before Abigail's disappearance, and somehow his name had never come up during the initial investigation. Rodriguez felt a mixture of excitement and anger as he reviewed Brennan's background. The man had a history of minor offenses involving children. Nothing that had resulted in serious charges, but a pattern that should have raised red flags. He had been living in Orlando during the time of Abigail's disappearance, but had moved to North Carolina in 2015, where he had continued to find work around children as a school maintenance worker. The investigation into Brennan revealed a man who had spent years perfecting his ability to blend into environments where children were present. He understood crowd dynamics, knew how security systems worked, and had developed strategies for gaining trust quickly. Former colleagues described him as quiet but helpful, the kind of person who volunteered for extra duties and never complained about difficult assignments. Most disturbing of all, Brennan had kept detailed journals that police discovered during a search of his North Carolina trailer. The journals contained observations about children he had encountered, including specific details about their appearances, behaviors, and family dynamics. One entry, dated March 20th, 2014, contained a description that perfectly matched Abigail, including a mention of the doll that looked just like her. The arrest of Thomas Brennan occurred on November 3rd, 2023, at his workplace in Charlotte, North Carolina. He offered no resistance and maintained his innocence even as evidence mounted against him. His trailer contained additional disturbing evidence, photographs of children, detailed maps of various tourist attractions, and most chillingly, a collection of children's personal items that appeared to span many years. For the Hayes family, Brennan's arrest represented both vindication and fresh anguish. Finally, they had answers about who had taken their daughter, but Brennan refused to reveal what had happened to Abigail or where she might be found. He was charged with kidnapping and would face additional charges as the investigation continued, but Jennifer and Mark still didn't know if their daughter was alive or dead. The media attention surrounding Brennan's arrest was intense, with reporters camping outside the Hayes family home and calling at all hours seeking interviews. Jennifer found herself thrust back into the public eye she had inhabited 9 years earlier, once again pleading for information that might lead them to Abigail. The difference now was that they had a face to put with their nightmare, a man whose ordinary appearance made him even more frightening than any monster their imaginations had conjured. Detective Rodriguez worked tirelessly to connect Brennan to other missing children cases, finding disturbing parallels in disappearances across Florida and the Southeast. The warehouse appeared to have been just one of several properties Brennan had used over the years, and investigators began the massive task of identifying other potential victims and crime scenes. As 2023 drew to a close, the Hayes family faced their 9th Christmas without Abigail. Emma the doll sat in her place of honor on the mantelpiece, cleaned and restored, but bearing the unmistakable marks of her long ordeal. Jennifer spent hours staring at the doll, wondering what stories Emma could tell if she could speak, what horrors she had witnessed, and most importantly, whether Abigail had been comforted by her presence during whatever ordeal she had endured. The investigation continued with new urgency as federal authorities joined local law enforcement in building a comprehensive case against Brennan. They were determined not just to secure his conviction, but to locate every child he had taken and provide answers to families who had lived in the same terrible uncertainty as the Hayes family. On February 14, 2024, Valentine's Day, Detective Rodriguez received the call he had both hoped for and dreaded for nearly a decade. Thomas Brennan, facing multiple life sentences and a mountain of evidence against him, had finally agreed to cooperate with investigators. His attorney had negotiated a plea agreement that would spare him the death penalty in exchange for full disclosure about his crimes and the locations of his victims. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at the Orange County Jail, with Rodriguez, federal agents, and the district attorney present. Brennan appeared smaller than his photograph suggested, a mundane man whose evil had hidden behind an unremarkable exterior. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the destruction of families. Brennan confirmed that he had taken Abigail during the parade chaos, using the crowd surge as cover to lead her away from her parents. He had told her that her mom and dad were looking for her and that he would help her find them, a lie that had worked because of his Disney uniform and authoritative manner. Abigail had trusted him completely, even thanking him for his help as he led her to his van in a remote section of the parking lot. What followed was a harrowing account of Abigail's final days that would haunt everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. Brennan had kept her at the warehouse for nearly a week, during which time she had repeatedly asked for her parents and cried for Emma, who had been lost during her abduction. Brennan had retrieved the doll from the park's Lost and Found, where it had been turned in by a cast member who found it during the search efforts. Abigail had died on March 21, 2014, 6 days after her disappearance, from injuries sustained during an attempt to escape from the warehouse. Brennan claimed it had been an accident, that she had fallen while trying to climb out a window, but the medical evidence would later suggest otherwise. He had buried her body in a wooded area about 40 miles east of Orlando, near the Wekiwa Springs State Park. The location Brennan provided led investigators to a small clearing where they found the remains of not just Abigail, but 3 other children who had been reported missing over the past 15 years. Each child had been buried with personal items, a teddy bear, a toy truck, a hair ribbon, suggesting that Brennan had maintained some twisted sense of caring for his victims even after death. Detective Rodriguez was present when they found Abigail's remains on February 22, 2024. After nearly 10 years of searching, the little girl, who had vanished into a crowd at the most magical place on earth, had finally come home. She was buried, wearing the remnants of her pink sundress with white flowers, and clutched in her small hands were the pieces of a friendship bracelet, something she had apparently made during her captivity using threads pulled from her clothing. The Hayes family's ordeal was finally over, but their pain had only begun to transform into a different kind of grief. Jennifer and Mark could finally mourn their daughter properly, knowing she was at peace, but they also had to live with the knowledge of what she had endured. The funeral was held on March 15, 2024, exactly 10 years after the family's magical day at Disney World had turned into a nightmare. Emma the doll was buried with Abigail, placed carefully in her small arms by the funeral director according to Jennifer's wishes. The doll had kept its silent vigil for 9 years, waiting in that abandoned warehouse like a faithful sentinel guarding the memory of the little girl who had loved her. Now, finally, they could be together again. Thomas Brennan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after pleading guilty to 4 counts of kidnapping and murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his cooperation in locating his victims had been the only thing standing between him and the electric chair. He showed no emotion during his sentencing, maintaining the same detached demeanor that had allowed him to blend into normal society for so many years. The case led to significant changes in security protocols at theme parks across the country, with Disney implementing new tracking technologies and communication systems designed to prevent similar disappearances. The Abigail Hayes Foundation, which Jennifer had started years earlier, became a national resource for families of missing children, providing support, advocacy, and resources that the Hayes family had desperately needed during their darkest days. Detective Rodriguez, now nearing retirement, kept a photograph of Abigail on his desk, not the age progression image, but one of the pictures Jennifer had taken at Disney World on that last morning, showing a little girl radiant with joy and anticipation. The photo served as a reminder of why he had chosen law enforcement as a career and why some cases become more than just files to be solved. Today, the Hayes family continues to live in Gainesville, where they have established a scholarship fund in Abigail's memory for children who want to study criminal justice or child psychology. Jennifer speaks regularly at conferences about missing children, sharing both the heartbreak of loss and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving the unthinkable. Mark has become an advocate for improved security measures at public venues, working with legislators to pass laws requiring better training and background checks for employees who work around children. The abandoned warehouse where Emma was found has been demolished, and the site has been converted into a small memorial park where families of missing children can find solace and support. A bronze plaque near the entrance bears Abigail's name and image, along with those of the other victims found at the site. The inscription reads simply, "In memory of the children who were lost, and in honor of the families who never stopped searching." Every year, on March 15th, the Hayes family visits Abigail's grave, where they leave fresh flowers and small toys that she would have enjoyed. Jennifer still sometimes finds herself shopping for things her daughter would have liked, momentarily forgetting that Abigail will always be 8 years old in her memory. The pain has softened over time, but it never truly disappears. It simply becomes part of the fabric of their daily lives. The case of Abigail Hayes serves as a stark reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces, and that even in places designed to be safe havens for children, vigilance is always necessary. It also demonstrates the power of persistence, both from law enforcement officers who refuse to let cases go cold, and from families who never stop believing that answers will eventually come. Emma the doll, found after 9 years of separation from the little girl who loved her, became a symbol of hope for other families of missing children. Her discovery proved that even when cases seem hopeless, evidence can still surface, and truth can still emerge from the darkness. In the end, Emma kept her silent promise to Abigail. She never left her side, even in death, waiting patiently in that warehouse until she could finally guide investigators home to the little girl who had vanished into a crowd on what should have been the most magical day of her life. The story of Abigail Hayes reminds us that behind every missing child case is a family whose world has been shattered, and that sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that bring not just answers, but peace. For the Hayes family, finding Emma was finding the last piece of their daughter, and finally being able to say goodbye to the little girl who had taught them that love endures even when hope seems lost.